Why would a woman who had already survived the cruelest heartbreak whisper, "I'm broken," to a cowboy she had only just begun to trust? The church door slammed as voices rose behind her. Ayanna clutched a worn leather suitcase so tightly her knuckles ached. Outside, cold Wyoming wind drove dust across the porch while a horse snorted against its reins. Jacob stepped into her path, removed his hat, and quietly said, "You won't face this road alone." But what had happened inside that little church to leave her ready to walk away from everything again? Share where you're watching from as we begin. The westbound stagecoach rattled across the Wyoming territory under a hard, late-spring sky. Red dust rolled behind it in a thick curtain, swallowing the road and everything Ayanna Pierce had left at the other end of it. She sat straight despite the jolting wheels, both gloved hands locked around the handle of an old leather suitcase. The case held 3 dresses, 2 teaching books, a gray ribbon, and 1 folded letter hidden beneath the lining. She had not opened that letter since leaving Boston. The coach struck a deep rut. Ayanna caught herself against the seat, and her sleeve slipped above her glove. A pale circle marked the brown skin of her ring finger. The elderly woman across from her noticed. Her eyes rested there for no more than a breath before turning toward the dusty window. "Most folks coming west are looking for land," she said. "The rest are trying to outrun a name." Ayanna pulled her sleeve down. "Maybe I'm trying to find out what remains when a name no longer feels like your own." The woman did not press. That small mercy nearly undid her. Near sundown, the driver called Willow Creek. The town appeared slowly through the dust. A blacksmith beneath an open-sided shed, horses tied shoulder to shoulder along a rail, freight crates stacked outside the general store. The stage stopped before the Pinewood Hotel with a groan of leather and iron. Ayanna stepped down. Her boots sank slightly into the loose earth. The dirt was plain. It made no promises. "Ayanna!" Lahi Bennett hurried from the hotel porch, round-faced and breathless, her apron lifting in the wind. She wrapped Ayanna in both arms. "You made it." Ayanna held on longer than she intended. "You said there was work." "There is, the new schoolhouse." Lahi took one end of the suitcase. "But the board only approved 6 months." 6 months. Long enough for them to decide whether they can live with being taught something themselves. Lahi led her inside, speaking quietly. Some families needed a teacher badly. Others objected to a black woman from Boston before she had written a single word on the board. Mayor Edwin Wilson preferred peace to fairness, and his wife, Margaret, had a way of turning private opinions into public decisions. That evening, Lahi brought Ayanna into the diner beside the hotel. Coffee steamed behind the counter. Beef hissed on the iron cook stove. Men spoke in low voices over chipped cups. The door opened, carrying in dust and the faint ring of spurs. A tall man stepped inside. His brown duster was powdered from the road. His sleeves were rolled, and a fresh scrape crossed one knuckle. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a face shaped by sun, wind, and long hours outdoors. "That's Jacob Vale," Lahi murmured. "Double V Ranch." Ayanna expected him to stare. Most men did, either too long or not at all. Jacob's blue-gray eyes found her. He held her gaze only long enough to acknowledge another human being. Then he tipped his head and moved toward an empty table. He did not ask who she was. He did not glance back. The restraint unsettled her more than curiosity would have. Later, in her room above the hotel, Ayanna removed her gloves and touched the bare ring mark. Moonlight lay across the washstand and the unopened suitcase. Below, Jacob crossed toward the livery. An older stableman struggled with a warped wagon wheel. Jacob set down his hat, braced one shoulder beneath the rim, and helped lift it into place. No one thanked him loudly. He seemed not to expect it. Ayanna let the curtain fall. The school board meeting was held the next morning inside the new white schoolhouse. The room smelled of pine boards, chalk, and fresh oil paint. Uneven desks faced a blackboard. A cracked map of the territories hung beside a pot-bellied stove. Mayor Wilson sat with Margaret, 2 ranchers, a widowed mother, and Reverend Thomas. Jacob's chair remained empty. "Teaching out here is practical work," Wilson said. "These children need more than Eastern ideas." Ayanna folded her hands on the desk. "I intend to teach arithmetic through feed accounts, geography through river and trail maps, and reading through notices their families must understand. A child who learns to read will not become less capable because of the hand that taught the letters." Silence tightened the room. The door opened. Jacob entered with his hat in his hand and dust along his boots. "Southern fence gave way," he said. "My apologies." He took the empty chair and listened. When one rancher suggested cutting Ayanna's trial to 60 days, Jacob finally spoke. "Double V paid the largest share of the school levy. That building was raised so Willow Creek could have a teacher, not so the board could dismiss one before she teaches." He did not defend her character. He did not tell the room to trust her. He only demanded that they judge her by her work. That difference stayed with Ayanna. After the meeting, Jacob waited near the doorway while she gathered her papers. "You held the room well," he said. "Rooms are easier than people. Rooms don't pretend their judgment is kindness." The corner of his mouth nearly lifted. "There's a barn raising at Double V on Saturday. Most of Willow Creek will be there. Are you inviting me because I need their approval?" "No." His gaze remained steady. "I'm inviting you because Willow Creek should meet its teacher somewhere other than across a table where they came prepared to judge her." Ayanna studied him, searching for pity and finding none. "Saturday, then." Across the street, Silas Crow stood beside Margaret Wilson near the general store. His eyes followed Jacob as he walked away from the schoolhouse. "Mr. Vale seems interested," Margaret said. Crow watched Ayanna close the schoolhouse door. "Every strong man has something he believes he cannot afford to lose," he said. "You only have to wait until he shows it to you." The next morning, 32 children entered the schoolhouse in mud-streaked boots. Tomas Rivera slipped into the last row and hid a reading primer beneath his arithmetic slate. Outside, Jacob rode past without stopping. He glanced toward the window just as Ayanna looked up. Neither waved. The school bell rang between them. That night, beneath a moon thin as a knife edge, someone crossed the empty barn-raising field. A hand tested the iron lantern hook above the unfinished tables. Then a blade scraped softly across the wire. By Monday morning, Willow Creek had filled the schoolhouse with every kind of child the territory could send through one door. Some arrived before sunrise after milking cows. Others came late with hayseed clinging to their sleeves. A few could read whole newspaper columns but stumbled over sums. Others could calculate the value of a steer without hesitation, yet could not write their own names. Ayanna changed her lessons before the first week ended. She measured the schoolyard fence to teach fractions. She brought seed sacks for multiplication and freight notices for reading. On a wall map, she traced Willow Creek, Cedar Wash, and the trails families used when snow closed the main road. Tomas Rivera sat in the last row, quick with numbers and careful with everything else. One afternoon, another boy laughed when Tomas struggled through a paragraph. Ayanna closed the book. "Tomas, come to the board." His face tightened, but he obeyed. She gave him a feed calculation meant for the oldest pupils. Tomas studied it, moved the chalk twice, and wrote the answer before anyone else understood the question. "A slow reader is not a slow mind," Ayanna said. "Sometimes the mind is waiting for someone patient enough to meet it." After the room emptied, she helped him sound out the paragraph without an audience. The next morning, Tomas arrived early and lit the pot-bellied stove. A wagon from the sawmill stopped outside later that week. 2 men unloaded fresh boards for the loose school steps. "Paid through Double V," the driver said, handing Ayanna a receipt. She found Jacob near the market hitching rail that afternoon. "I don't want charity tied to my school." Jacob reached into his coat and produced a folded district levy paper. The ranch was already assessed for repairs, Your steps were unsafe. You expected me to question it. I hoped you would. He handed her the receipt. Help should leave a person standing straighter, not owing the giver a bent back. Ayanna looked at the paper, then at him. You seem to prepare for arguments. Only the ones worth having. Saturday came warm and bright. Wagons crowded the road to Double V Ranch, carrying tools, food, children, and enough talk to fill the valley. Fresh-cut pine lay stacked beside the barn site. Ropes groaned as men lifted beams. Cast-iron pots steamed beneath the cottonwoods. Lahi had lent Ayanna a plain blue work dress. People will watch, Ayanna said as they climbed down from the wagon. Then give them something useful to see. Mrs. Maychen handed Ayanna a knife and a basket of apples without ceremony. Soon Ayanna was slicing fruit, stirring batter, and speaking with Tomas's widowed mother about his lessons. Across the field, Jacob worked beside his ranch hands. He checked knots, lifted beams, and sent an older man to water before exhaustion could make the decision for him. He never raised his voice. The men listened anyway. Near noon, Ayanna carried a heavy coffee jug across the uneven yard. Her boot caught under a cottonwood root. The jug tipped. Jacob caught her elbow with one hand and steadied her waist with the other. For one breath, she felt the warmth of his palm through the blue cloth. Then he released her. You teach, he said, taking the jug. I'll risk the coffee. She smoothed her skirt. I'm beginning to understand why your men obey you. You make every order sound like a favor. His smile came slowly, open and unexpected. At sundown, the barn frame stood against the gold sky. A fiddler struck up a Virginia reel, and couples formed across the hard-packed ground. Ayanna remained near the tables until Jacob stopped before her. Several conversations softened around them. He extended his hand. Do you trust me for one dance? Only one? We can renegotiate if I keep you on your feet. She placed her hand in his. At first, her steps were stiff. Jacob counted quietly beneath the fiddle music. When she turned the wrong direction and nearly collided with Lahi, laughter escaped her before she could stop it. Jacob stared as though the sound had surprised him. Margaret Wilson watched from the barn entrance. Silas Crow stood beside her. The music ended, but before Jacob could release Ayanna's hand, metal snapped overhead. A lantern struck the edge of a table. Flame raced across the dry cloth. Wind shoved it toward the stacked boards. People shouted. Chairs overturned. Children scattered through the smoke. Tomas tripped beside the cooking table. Fire caught at his sleeve. Jacob reached him first. He pulled the boy down and smothered the flame beneath his coat, speaking low while Tomas cried. You're here. Stay with me. Look at me. Ayanna dropped beside them. Clean water, she ordered. Fresh cloth, no grease. Give him room to breathe. She cut away the damaged sleeve and wrapped the boy's arm while Jacob held him steady. Their eyes met once through the smoke. No panic, no question, only work. By the time the doctor arrived, the fire had been beaten down and Tomas's breathing had slowed. His injury would hurt, but it would heal. Jacob's palm was blistered. His shoulder had been scraped through the shirt. It's nothing, he said as Ayanna cleaned his hand. A man can be brave and still sit still while someone tends him. He sat still. Long after the wagons left, Jacob returned to the scorched table with Pete, his foreman. The lantern hook had not broken. It had been cut. Pete crouched and lifted a short length of dark binding wire from the dirt. Crow uses this on his freight wagons. Could have come from anywhere, Jacob said. You believe that? Jacob folded the wire into his palm. No. Pete urged him to take it to Sheriff Amos Reed. Not yet. Suspicion isn't proof. He pocketed the wire and looked toward the road Ayanna had taken back to town. He did not tell her. The next morning, Jacob stopped at Lahi's porch and invited Ayanna to ride with him to the Southern Creek and the school district boundary. She agreed. After he left, Lahi leaned against the doorway. Do you know what you're doing? Ayanna watched Jacob mount his horse. No. Lahi smiled. That may be the first honest thing love ever asks of anyone. Back at the barn field, Caleb Voss moved among the blackened boards. Near the table, something gray rested in the dirt. Ayanna's ribbon. He picked it up and folded it into his coat. Silas Crow stepped from the shadow of the unfinished barn. Did Vale see you cut the hook? He saw enough to wonder. Crow held out his hand. Caleb gave him the ribbon. Crow closed his fingers around it. Then we'll give him something else to fear losing. The following morning, Jacob arrived outside Lahi's boarding house with 2 saddled horses and a small canvas food bag tied behind his seat. Ayanna stepped onto the porch in a dark riding skirt and fitted jacket. She had ridden before, years ago near Boston, but the mare beneath her shifted with the restless patience of an animal that knew the open country better than she did. Jacob adjusted the left stirrup, then stepped back. Too short? She settled her boot into it. No, just unfamiliar. That passes. They rode south beyond Willow Creek, leaving the blacksmith's hammer and wagon noise behind. Sagebrush rolled toward low red ridges. Cottonwoods followed the creek in a crooked green line. Farther west, the land lifted toward the mountains, pale beneath the morning sun. Ayanna looked across the empty distance. There's nowhere to hide out here. Jacob glanced toward her. That's why people either become honest or spend their lives building larger lies. At the creek, he spread a wool blanket beneath the willows. Their meal was simple. Bread, cheese, dried apples, and honey water poured into tin cups. For a while they listened to the current slide over stones. Jacob turned his cup between both hands. I wasn't raised here. Lahi told me Philadelphia. My father was a merchant. My mother taught music. He looked toward Cedar Wash beyond the trees. My younger brother Samuel came west with me. Second year, we tried to cross before a storm. His voice changed only slightly. I thought we had time. The water rose faster than I judged. I reached the bank. Ayanna waited. Samuel didn't. The creek moved softly between them. That's why you watch the sky, she said. That's why I watch everything twice. She understood then that his calm was not the absence of fear. It was what remained after years of obeying it. Jacob did not ask about Boston immediately. When he finally did, he left the question open. You don't have to tell me. That made it possible. His name was Charles Whitmore, Ayanna said. An attorney, old family, old money. He courted me in private for more than a year. Her thumb pressed against the rim of the cup. He praised my teaching, said he admired my courage, said we would leave Boston if we had to. A willow leaf turned in the breeze. On the wedding day, I entered the ballroom alone. Some of the guests already knew he had gone. His letter was waiting beside the flowers. Jacob's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He wrote that a marriage to me would cost him his family and his profession. He called it impossible. Her eyes remained on the creek. People watched me understand it. That was the worst part. He did not only leave me, he let me stand there while everyone watched the truth reach me. Jacob placed one open hand on the blanket between them. He did not take hers. Ayanna looked at it for a long moment, then rested her fingers against his palm. Some days I think he broke something that cannot be put back. What he did revealed his measure, Jacob said. Not yours. Her breath trembled. I'm broken. His fingers closed gently around hers. Then I won't ask you to pretend otherwise. But you will never face another hard night alone while I have a road left to reach you. Clouds gathered before either of them noticed how dark the western ridge had become. Jacob stood abruptly. We need to move. Thunder rolled across the valley. They reached Cedar Wash just as brown water surged over the trail, carrying branches and loose brush. No crossing now, Jacob said. There's a line cabin half a mile east. Rain struck before they reached it. Cold sheets flattened the grass. Lightning frightened Ayanna's mare, and Jacob caught the bridle, guiding both horses through the mud until the cabin appeared through the downpour. Inside were one bed, a hearth, a chair, and a storage chest. Jacob lit the fire, handed Ayanna a dry shirt and wool blanket, then stepped beneath the lean-to while she changed. When he returned, he placed his wet coat near the hearth. "You take the bed, I'll stay by the fire." Thunder cracked directly overhead. Ayanna flinched so hard the tin cup slipped from her hand. For one terrible instant, she was back in Boston. Rain on ballroom windows, wet carriage wheels outside, Charles's letter shaking in her fingers. Jacob found her crouched near the hearth. He stopped several feet away. "Do you want me closer?" Ayanna nodded. He sat beside her. She leaned her forehead against his shoulder, and he drew the blanket around her without tightening his arms. "Kindness frightens me," she whispered. "Cruelty used to arrive dressed like kindness." "I'm afraid of promises," he said. "Last time I trusted one, my brother did not come home." She touched the healing burn across his palm. "Can two frightened people still tell the truth? They may be the only ones who know what truth costs." Ayanna lifted her face. She closed the distance. Their first kiss was quiet, uncertain, and warm against the thunder. Jacob stopped after a moment, searching her eyes. She kept one hand behind his neck and kissed him again. Later, Ayanna slept in the bed while Jacob remained in the chair beside the fire. At dawn, she woke to the scrape of a knife against leather. Jacob sat near the stove, repairing the split seam of her wet boot. By noon, they were riding back toward Willow Creek. Caleb Voss had already reached the saloon. By supper, the market knew both horses had spent the night outside Jacob's cabin. By evening, Margaret Wilson knew. By Sunday, Caleb had added details no man could have witnessed. Ayanna returned to the schoolhouse beneath 32 children's eyes and several adults' silence. Tomas noticed her hand trembling against the chalk. He raised his hand. "Miss Pierce, if the Missouri River bends east before it goes south, does that change how far it travels?" Ayanna turned from the board and answered him. The lesson continued. That afternoon, Jacob brought a wooden box of flour, jerky, honey, and dried fruit for the pupils. "They'll talk more if you keep coming here," Ayanna said. "A lie does not become smaller because decent people step away from it." Silas Crow visited Double V the following day with a cattle contract folded inside his coat. "Sign," Crow said, "and perhaps this school trouble fades." Jacob looked at him across the ranch gate. "You know too much about how it began." Crow smiled. "Willow Creek may forgive a ranch owner. It will not forgive a teacher respectable women have already decided to distrust." Jacob opened the gate. "Leave." Weeks later, the Harvest Festival filled the Double V barn with lantern light and fiddle music. Ayanna wore copper-colored cloth, warm against her skin. Jacob crossed the floor and offered his hand. "People are watching," she murmured. "Let them see something honest for once." They danced in full view of Willow Creek. Later, on the porch, Jacob asked her to stay beyond the 6-month trial. "I want to," she said, "but sometimes love feels like borrowed warmth." "I'll wait." She looked at him beneath the swinging lanterns. "Then wait near enough that I can still find you." Mayor Wilson approached before Jacob could answer. He carried a folded notice. "The board has called an emergency hearing." Ayanna opened it. A strip of gray ribbon lay inside. Her ribbon. She remembered it falling near the scorched barn table, not the cabin. Across the room, Caleb Voss lowered his eyes. The schoolhouse hearing was held 3 mornings later. Every desk had been pushed against the walls. Parents filled the room, boots scraping the floorboards, hats held low against their chests. Children gathered outside beneath the windows, trying to hear without being seen. Ayanna sat at the front table with her hands folded over the school ledger. Lahi took the chair behind her. Jacob stood near the wall, shoulders rigid beneath his dark coat. Sheriff Amos Reed remained beside the door. Silas Crow sat near Margaret Wilson, as if he belonged there. Margaret spoke first. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. A teacher must protect the confidence of every family in this district. She spoke of reputation, moral example, the impression left upon children. Then Caleb Voss took the floor. He said he had ridden the southern road during the storm. He had seen Ayanna's horse and Jacob's tied outside the line cabin after nightfall. "Did you see what occurred inside?" Reverend Thomas asked. Caleb shifted his hat between his hands. "No, sir." "But you have described it around town." Caleb's face tightened. "Folks can draw their own conclusions." A boarding house guest testified that Ayanna had returned wearing Jacob's cloak. Then Margaret placed the strip of gray ribbon on the table. "Found near Mr. Vale's bed," she said. "That is false," Ayanna answered. "I lost it at the barn raising." Crow leaned back in his chair. There was smoke, confusion. Perhaps Miss Pierce is mistaken. Jacob stepped forward. That ribbon was planted. Mayor Wilson struck the table with a small wooden mallet. "We will keep order." Ayanna looked from face to face. Some were ashamed. Others seemed relieved that someone had given their suspicion respectable language. Mayor Wilson asked whether she had spent the night in Jacob's cabin. "Yes." A whisper moved through the room. "Cedar Wash had flooded," Ayanna said. "The trail was impassable. Mr. Vale gave me the bed and slept beside the hearth." Margaret's hands remained neatly folded. "Why did you not wait beneath the shed, or attempt the road alone?" Even the stove seemed to go quiet. Ayanna rose. "You are not asking whether I endangered a child. You are asking whether a woman like me may survive a storm without becoming one." Outside, a child shifted beneath the window. Ayanna turned toward the rows of slates stacked beside the wall. "Attendance has risen. Older pupils can now read freight notices and calculate feed shares." Tomas Rivera reads aloud without hiding his book. "Not one person here has shown that I failed as a teacher." No one answered. Mayor Wilson looked down at the papers before him. Jacob saw the decision forming in the room. Fear moved through him faster than judgment. "I intend to marry her," he said. The words struck the schoolhouse harder than a slammed door. Margaret drew a breath. Crow smiled. Ayanna turned toward Jacob slowly. He stepped closer. "I can make the engagement public today. There will be no question of—" "Did you ask me?" His voice stopped. "Did you ask whether I wanted my life repaired for their comfort?" "I'm trying to protect you. I did not come to become another man's answer to a problem." Ayanna reached into her pocket, removed the silver school key, and placed it on the table. The sound was small. It carried through the whole room. The board voted. Reverend Thomas refused to support dismissal without proof. The count tied. Mayor Wilson cast the deciding vote for suspension until winter. Ayanna understood what that meant. Outside, the wind had risen. It pulled dust along the school steps and rattled the dry cottonwood leaves. Jacob followed her. Marriage was not pity. Then why did you first speak of it before a room full of people? He had no answer that did not sound like fear. Ayanna's eyes shone, but her voice stayed level. Charles left because he feared what the world would take from him. You offered marriage because you feared the same. Both of you decided what I would carry. Jacob flinched, as if she had struck him. She regretted the comparison at once, but not enough to take it back. "I need distance." He let her walk away because he believed following would become another pressure upon her. To Ayanna, his stillness looked like abandonment. The schoolhouse closed the next morning. Tomas sat on the front step with his reading book open across his knees. No bell rang, no children entered. At Pinewood Hotel, Ayanna packed her teaching dress, her books, the gray ribbon, and Charles Whitmore's unopened letter. Lahi stood near the washstand. Where will you go? Somewhere people don't already know how foolish I've been. Boston taught you to run from cruelty, Lahi said. Do not let Willow Creek teach you to run from love. Ayanna placed the letter beneath her dresses and shut the suitcase. At Double V Ranch, Jacob opened a locked drawer in his desk. He laid out the cut lantern hook, the dark freight wire, and a matching twist taken from one of Crow's wagons. Pete watched from the doorway. She thinks you left her. Clearing her name matters more than explaining myself. A man can do the right work and still leave the wrong silence behind him. Jacob pocketed the evidence and rode for Sheriff Reed. Mrs. May Chen arrived at Lahi's diner that afternoon with a box of school supplies Ayanna had ordered weeks earlier. When she heard about the ribbon, she went still. I saw Caleb with gray cloth after the fire, she said. Soot on his cuff. Crow was speaking to him behind the freight shed. Sheriff Reed searched Crow's yard with Jacob and Pete. A stable boy admitted Caleb had paid him to replace a knife with a broken blade. The knife was found in a rain barrel, rust beginning along the edge. It fit the mark on the lantern hook. But Reed shook his head. This ties Voss to the fire, not Crow to the hearing. Crow learned of the search before sunset. He ordered Caleb to burn the freight ledger. Caleb took it, but fear had finally turned on the man who paid him. Instead of burning the book, he hid it in an abandoned line shack near Cedar Wash. Then Crow sent 2 men after him. Snow began early that year. Ayanna bought a stage ticket for the first clear morning. Before leaving, she went once more to the empty schoolhouse. Across the blackboard, Tomas had written in careful block letters, Miss Pierce taught me I was not slow. Ayanna pressed her palm against the words. Outside, Jacob stood beside the frosted window. He had come to speak. Sheriff Reed rode up before he entered. Voss is gone, Reed said. Took Crow's ledger with him. Jacob looked through the glass at Ayanna's bowed head. Then he turned toward Cedar Wash. Ayanna heard the hoofbeats leaving. By the time she reached the window, the road was empty. Near dusk, they found Caleb inside the abandoned line shack, bruised and barely able to sit upright. He pushed the freight ledger toward Jacob. Inside were payments marked for lantern work, school witnesses, pressure on Wilson, and the Vail contract. One entry mentioned the Boston letter. Jacob turned the page. Beside a payment dated 3 weeks before Ayanna arrived in Wyoming was a name he already knew. Charles Whitmore. Jacob stared at the ledger until the letters blurred beneath the lantern light. Sheriff Amos Reed slowly turned another page. Payments were listed in neat columns beside freight deliveries and cattle contracts. Hidden among them were smaller entries written in a different hand. Boston correspondence, school witness, lantern work, ribbon. Crow folded more than freight through his business. He had folded lies into people's lives. Caleb struggled to breathe. Shh. He paid me to keep the ribbon, he whispered. Said folks believe what they already fear. And Whitmore? Jacob asked quietly. Caleb swallowed. Crow got letters from Boston. That lawyer wanted the teacher watched, wanted her kept quiet. Jacob closed the ledger. Not once did he think about revenge. He thought only of Ayanna boarding a stagecoach, believing she had been abandoned twice. By dawn, snow covered Willow Creek. The stagecoach stood outside the depot with steam rising from the horses. Ayanna sat inside, her suitcase resting across her knees exactly as it had the day she arrived. Her gloves covered the pale mark on her finger. Another passenger smiled kindly. Heading home? Ayanna looked through the frosted window. I'm not certain I know where that is. Outside, church bells suddenly began ringing. Not the slow Sunday rhythm, fast, urgent. People stepped from the general store, the diner, and the blacksmith's shed. Sheriff Reed rode into town beside Jacob and Pete. Behind them came a wagon carrying Caleb beneath heavy blankets. Silas Crow slipped from the freight office toward the alley. "Silas Crow!" Sheriff Reed called. Crow kept walking. 2 deputies moved across the street and stopped him before he reached his horse. Mayor Wilson ordered everyone to their schoolhouse. Ayanna remained seated inside the coach. Jacob approached, but stopped several feet away. Snow drifted between them. "You have a choice," he said. She looked at him without speaking. "You may leave now, or hear the truth with me, or hear it before everyone." He did not step closer. He did not reach for her. The choice rested entirely with her. After a long silence, Ayanna picked up her suitcase and climbed down. "If the accusation was made before the town," she said, "the truth belongs there too." The schoolhouse filled once again. This time Sheriff Reed stood where Margaret Wilson had stood before. He placed the freight ledger upon the teacher's desk. Mrs. Machen testified about seeing Caleb with the gray ribbon after the barn fire. Pete laid the cut lantern hook beside the matching freight wire. Caleb admitted that Crow had ordered him to spread the rumor and hide the ribbon until it could be used against Ayanna. Finally, Reed opened the ledger to the Boston payments. The correspondence came from Charles Whitmore. The room became perfectly still. Ayanna reached into her suitcase. For months, she had carried Charles's letter without unfolding it. Now she opened it one final time. The handwriting matched the copied instructions inside Crow's ledger. She read only enough to confirm what her heart had already known. Then she crossed to the stove. Without ceremony, she fed the letter into the fire. The paper curled black. Charles's name disappeared first. No one spoke until the last corner turned to ash. Mayor Wilson removed his spectacles. "We asked Miss Pierce to prove her innocence when it should have been our duty to require proof of guilt." Margaret Wilson lowered her eyes. Before she could answer, Tomas stepped inside from the doorway. "She was the only one who asked what we needed before deciding what was good for us." No adult interrupted him. Reverend Thomas stood. "I move that Miss Pierce be restored as teacher immediately." Every hand rose, even Margaret's. Ayanna did not pick up the school key. Not yet. Instead, she placed 5 handwritten conditions before the board. No teacher would again be removed by rumor alone. Every accusation would require named witnesses and evidence. Every child would have the right to learn regardless of family circumstance. Older working children would be allowed flexible attendance. School accounts would remain open for public inspection. Mayor Wilson signed first. Margaret signed last. Outside the schoolhouse, Jacob waited beneath the falling snow. "I was wrong," he said before she could speak. "I called it protection because I was afraid to call it control." Ayanna watched him quietly. "I wanted to save your work. You nearly took my choice. I know." His voice carried no defense. "I cannot ask you to trust a promise I broke the first time fear tested it." He took one slow breath. "Whether you stay, leave, marry me, or never speak to me again, Double V Ranch will continue supporting the school." She looked at him for a long moment. "Why didn't you tell me about the investigation?" "I've always hidden fear behind silence." Ayanna nodded slowly. "Silence is gentle only when both people understand it." He bowed his head. "I'll spend the rest of my life learning the difference." The stagecoach still waited. The driver lifted her suitcase. "Ma'am, where shall I put this?" Ayanna looked toward Lahi, toward Tomas, toward the white schoolhouse standing against the snow. Finally, she looked at Jacob, who remained exactly where he was, asking for nothing. She smiled through quiet tears. Back at the hotel, the driver carried the suitcase away. Jacob released a breath he had been holding for days. Winter settled gently over Willow Creek. The school reopened. Paper flowers brightened the windows. Tomas helped younger children sound out their lessons. Jacob repaired loose shingles and broken fence rails without ever stepping into Ayanna's classroom unless invited. They learned each other again, one honest conversation at a time. Near Christmas, Jacob visited after the children had gone home. He placed a small wrapped parcel on her desk. Inside rested a simple silver locket. Empty. "I thought you might want one place where you decide what deserves to remain." She smiled. "Is this another proposal?" He laughed softly. "No. I learned not to hide questions inside gifts." "When spring comes," he said, "may I ask properly?" She closed the locket. "When the creek starts moving again." Spring arrived exactly where their story had changed. The southern creek ran clear beneath fresh willow leaves. Jacob unfolded a handwritten agreement before taking out a simple iron and silver ring. "The school remains yours." He smiled. "So does your name, if you wish." She read every page. Then she looked at him. "Do you believe love needs a contract?" "No." He held her eyes. "But trust deserves something stronger than a beautiful sentence," he asked. She answered yes. Their wedding took place in the little Willow Creek church beneath fresh pine branches and handmade paper flowers. When Reverend Thomas asked who stood with the bride, no father answered. The town spoke together. "We do." Jacob's hand trembled as he placed the ring upon her finger. Ayanna smiled and steadied his hand. Months later, the school had grown. Tomas now taught younger children after lessons ended. One warm evening, Ayanna rested a hand gently against her growing belly. Jacob knelt beside her. He placed his rough hand over hers. "This home," he whispered, "will have one more voice to teach us how to listen." At sunset, they sat together on the porch overlooking Double V Ranch, the schoolhouse, and Willow Creek glowing beyond the cottonwoods. "Do you remember arriving with one suitcase?" Jacob asked. "I thought it carried the last pieces of my life." "And now?" She listened as the school bell drifted across the valley. "Broken isn't the same as finished." Jacob reached for her hand. The pale mark left by one broken promise had disappeared beneath a ring she had chosen freely. The West had never erased Boston. It had simply given two wounded people enough room to build something stronger than memory. Not through grand speeches, not through rescue, but through truth, patience, and the quiet courage to keep showing up after every storm. If your heart found a home somewhere in Ayanna and Jacob's journey, tell us where your own soul has finally found peace. And if this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because somewhere out there, someone may still be waiting to believe that broken is not the end of their story. But through truth, patience, and the quiet courage to keep showing up after every storm, Ayanna and Jacob discovered that love is not something that rescues us overnight. It is built one honest conversation, one forgiven mistake, and one faithful step at a time. If you've ever carried a wound that no one else could see, if you've ever packed your memories into a single suitcase and wondered whether there was still a place where you truly belonged, then perhaps part of this journey belongs to you too. Imagine standing where Ayanna stood, believing your story had already been written by someone else's betrayal, only to find that the next chapter was waiting in a place you never expected. What stays with me most isn't the wedding or the promise of tomorrow. It's the quiet moments. A repaired boot beside a fire, a hand offered without demand, a schoolhouse filled with children who learned that kindness can change the course of a life. Those are the moments that become a home. If this story touched something in your own heart, I'd love to hear from you. Where has life surprised you with a second chance when you least expected one? And if these quiet journeys across the American frontier speak to you, I hope you'll join us again. There are more stories waiting beyond the next mountain. Stories of healing, enduring love, unexpected grace, and the kind of hope that often arrives in the smallest moments. Until then, thank you for spending this time with us. And may you always find the courage to keep walking toward the place your heart calls home.